Yo, what is up? It is your boy Zether, back at it again with part 3 to What If Deku Had Midas's Golden Touch. Now, on the last part, we had pretty much ended off on the note which Deku pretty much ended up hanging out with Araka after, pretty much saving her from the Zero Pointer. We also pretty much went over how Deku ended up helping a family out with a financial issue, and a couple of funny moments that ended up happening in the last part, with the girls pretty much hitting on Deku and making Araka jealous. And, most important of all, Deku ended up turning Lord Explosion Murder back into what he used to be. And in terms of the heroes versus villains, Deku ended up mollywopping Bakugo, and they ended up winning that. And, one of the very, key parts that I honestly kind of forgot was that Deku had actually ended up healing All Might with its Golden Touch. So that's pretty much all we have in terms of the recap. And once we get back, we're pretty much just going to be talking about normal school and Deku just pretty much hanging out with Araka. So with that being said, let's
get started.
Alrighty. Alright, so basically after what had happened on the last part, Deku would pretty much just end up hanging out with Araka and training her in hand-to-hand combat for the next week or so, up until the USJ would happen, of course. And while he trains with her in terms of hand-to-hand combat and teaches her, how to do that stuff in his, his little facility, he would also wind up ending up learning how to, do his healing and unhealing procedures that I had pretty much gone over in the last part. And he had basically ended up learning how to choose what heals and what doesn't. So let's say he would touch the Nomu after inflicting damage to it. After he, undoes it, it would keep all the damage instead of healing it like he did with All Might. Since that only happens to people who he views as, good and on his side pretty much. And that's how we're pretty much going to be using the little concept of Deku pretty much being able to heal people. Now, this is when they're pretty much in class and, Araka would get that little training in that she did with, Gunhead, except much early on. So she would be a lot more useful in terms of, her hand-to-hand combat and her abilities out in the field, honestly. And that would honestly just help her a lot in terms of, anything such as, things like that. So this is when we're now actually going to be going over to when they're pretty much on the bus. And, they're straight just chilling, to be honest with you guys. They're on the bus, and they're pretty much just talking about what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be doing things. And, Aizawa was pretty much just over there in the front driving, just being like, I hate my life. And this is when, pretty much everybody would just be having a pretty good time, just talking on the bus. Suyu would ask who they think is the strongest in the class. And this is the one, Araka would say, it's Deku, of course. I mean, he can turn things into gold. It's such an awesome and unorthodox and really powerful quirk. It's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And one of the other girls would pretty much end up perking up and saying, what? I honestly thought that Todoroki's quirk was the best. I mean, yeah, Deku has gold, but Todoroki has ice. The capabilities with that are way more than what you can do with gold. As Deku would just, hear that, he would be like, so y'all testing me. All right, bet. And, this is when pretty much they would arrive, as the Hero 13 would proceed to give her a little boring speech that she always does in canon, telling the kids that, their powers can be dangerous and, to pretty much just be good people. As the class would just hear her, and Deku would just be kind of bored at that. I mean, he already knows that. They're not stupid after all. And this is when pretty much Kurogiri would arrive, as he would proceed to warp gate everybody in the class to, the locations that he did in the original canon, as this version of Deku actually wouldn't be able to stop it, considering the fact that, Kurogiri is not exactly, he can't exactly be touched in the way that, other people can. So Kurogiri would actually end up, not being able to get, caught. So this is when pretty much we're going to go over to when, Deku lands in the water, as Suyu would pretty much rescue him and Mineta just like she did in the original canon, except this time when she lands on top and Deku was pretty much getting his air back, he'd proceed to ask them what their quirks are. As Suyu would proceed to explain that her quirk is pretty much water, as Deku would say that it's weird how, they would send somebody like her to a water-based location, as he would say that they obviously didn't know what they were doing. As he would say that he hopes that the rest of the classmates are okay, and especially hopes that Araka's fine. As he would then look down towards the villains that are pretty much waiting to have them come down to them. as they don't know what their quirks are. So this is when Deku would tell them both, as he would ask Mineta and Tsuyu to pretty much jump up into the air real quick. As they would say, what? Deku would just say, just do it. As they would jump up, and as soon as they do, Deku would put one foot on the ground as he would say, Golden Domain. As this is when Deku would pretty much turn the entire lake and boat into gold, leaving all of the villains that were on the boat, or I mean in the water, just turned into gold. They would be unable to move, and that would pretty much end up, taking all of them down. As Deku would pretty much get off of the boat with all of them, taking the ladder down. As this is when Deku would proceed to rush towards where there's a big pile of villains over there. As Deku would decide that he's going to go help out Aizawa, take out a couple of villains. As he sees that Aizawa, he definitely has an amazing quirk in terms of fighting somebody with a powerful quirk one-to-one, one-on-one, like in terms of hand-to-hand combat. But in terms of, this many enemies, Aizawa is definitely outclassed. As Deku would rush towards Aizawa, asking him if he needs a hand. As Aizawa would just think, yeah, but don't get hurt, kid. As Deku would say, trust me, I won't. As this is when Deku and Aizawa would get back to back, as he would say, I'll take the ones on the left, you take the ones on the right. Let's go. As Aizawa would just smile, as he would then rush towards the villains, as he would start elbowing them and swiping them by the legs, as Aizawa would grab the scarf and start, hitting them all with their legs, jumping on top of them and turning some of them, flipping them over, as Aizawa was pretty much starting to look like a total badass. This is when Deku would see what Aizawa was doing, as he would then think that Aizawa was, actually kind of cool. And this is when Deku would decide that, maybe he's going to show off a bit as well, as Deku would proceed to pretty much do what you'd expect Deku to do and start showing off a little bit. As Deku's pretty much just showing off and taking down as many villains as he possibly can. He would proceed to body all of the villains that were near him, and this is when he would actually show off his golden form, where he pretty much hardens himself, as he would rush towards a bunch of villains and pretty much proceed to hit them once, as most of them would pretty much drop down to the floor as soon as they get smacked. As Deku would definitely end up, helping in the long run, as, he turns a bunch of villains into gold, and this is when Shigaraki would get annoyed, as he would say, Nomu, kill that brat. As this is when the Nomu would rush towards Deku, as Deku would narrowly see the fist coming at him, as he would dodge out of the way, barely getting nicked by the side, but that'd be enough to send Deku flying back a bit, as Deku would say, ugh. As this is when Aizawa would see that his student got hurt, as Aizawa would shoot a scarf at the Nomu, as he would try to restrict its arms, but the Nomu would wail away, as Aizawa would get flung over there, very far away, about, let's just say, 300 feet away from there. As this is when Deku would pretty much rush towards the Nomu, running in that Naruto style, as this is when the Nomu would pretty much throw another punch at Deku, but this time Deku would be ready. He would slide under the Nomu, as he would grab onto the Nomu's legs and turn him into gold. As the Nomu would try to punch that Deku, but it would turn into solid gold before it can even move. As Deku would pretty much just smile after he does that, as he would rush towards Aizawa, asking him if he's okay. And this is when Shigaraki would see that had happened, as he would say, no, they cheated. This wasn't supposed to happen. As, this is when pretty much everybody would pretty much just start looking towards them, as this is when Shigaraki would say, that damn brat, he took out the Nomu. How was he able to do that? As he would then rush towards Deku, as Deku would see, Shigaraki rushing at him, as Deku would pretty much proceed to run away and, take a couple steps back, as he would not be sure of what Shigaraki's quirk is, but this is when Shigaraki would pretty much proceed to rush at Deku, as he would try to put his hands on Deku, as Deku would just realize that he has a quirk similar to his, where if he can touch something, he can pretty much decay it. As, Aizawa would actually end up rushing towards Shigaraki, as he grabs him with a scarf and flings him over to Deku, as Deku would hit him with an uppercut, sending Shigaraki flying backwards. As Deku and Aizawa would pretty much proceed to pummel on Shigaraki, as they would say, why are you here? As this is when Shigaraki would say, I'm not going to tell you anything. As he would then say, Kurogiri, get me out of here. As this is when Deku would look at Kurogiri, as Kurogiri was about to teleport, Shigaraki away, as Bakugo would come flying in, as he says, no you don't! As he would then grab Shigaraki's metal pieces, he would blast him onto the ground with a full power explosion, as Kurogiri would be in lots of pain, as he would be on the ground in agony. As this is when Deku would say, "I got this," as he would rush towards Kurogiri and turn him into gold, as his entire mist would turn into gold, as Kurogiri would pretty much be on the ground. As this is when Deku would look towards Bakugo, as he would say, "Thanks," as this is when he would then look towards Shigaraki, and Shigaraki just takes a step back and says, "Wait, stand back." As this is when Deku would decide that he's done playing games, as he would rush towards Shigaraki and tap him, as he would act like he's about to poke Shigaraki in the eyes, and he would then punch Shigaraki, turning him to gold, in a Muriel fashion, as I guess you could say. As Deku would pretty much proceed to, just pretty much help in the taking down of Shigaraki. As Shigaraki would pretty much be like, "Damn brat, I'll kill you." As, this is when pretty much the cleanup would happen, as Shigaraki would be turned into gold, and with Kurogiri also being turned into gold, this would mean that, Shigaraki and Kurogiri would be out of commission, and they'd be taken into Tartarus, the prison. As All For One would get wind of this and be extremely angry that his successor was taken down that easily. As he would then decide that if it was that easy, then, he might as well not have even chosen him. It wasn't even worth it. As this is when Deku would run around, as he and Aizawa would pretty much proceed to help the rest of the kids take down any of the other villains that are left. As the cleanup would go by pretty smoothly, and Aizawa would actually thank Deku for helping him out with taking down the rest of those villains, as he tells Deku that he doesn't know if he was going to be able to take them all down by himself, as Deku would say that it was no problem, as Aizawa would pretty much go up to Deku as he would ask, "Hey kid, I want to offer you something," as Deku would say, "What is it?" As we then look towards Aizawa, as Aizawa would pretty much tell Deku that he wants to offer him a chance to train him with a scarf. He asked Deku if he'd be interested in training with that scarf of his, as Aizawa would pretty much say that, as Deku, not Aizawa, as Deku would look towards Aizawa and say, "What? Really?" As Aizawa would say, "Yeah, kid, you are pretty great at hand-to-hand combat. I don't think it'll take you that long to learn how to use this scarf, or at least as long as it took me." As Deku would say, "Huh, you really think so?" As Aizawa would say, "I know so, kid. There's no way with that quirk of yours and that talented fighting style you won't be able to get this down packed. I know you'll be able to get this down packed in no time." As Deku would say, "Well, if you think I can do it, then I'm completely down." As Aizawa would then look towards Deku and tell him that they're most likely going to be having a 2-week break off of school, and during that 2 weeks he could train him on the basics of how to use the scarf. As Deku would be very intrigued by that notion, as this is when Kurogiri would pretty much be, Kurogiri and Shigaraki would be unturned into gold, as we would have a lot of different things pretty much happening all over the place, as a lot of different scenarios would be going down, as All For One is struggling with what happened to his successor. Deku was training with Aizawa, and All Might is actually now back to how he was. So in terms of his hero work, he would actually be able to be with the kids whenever they need. So All Might won't be, kind of a liability for them. As for the 2-week break, we're not going to be talking on that, as this is when pretty much Deku would proceed to keep training with Uraraka, as this time Deku would actually ask Aizawa if he could also train Uraraka in some hand-to-hand combat and help clean her up in terms of some areas that she's lacking in. As Aizawa would say that he'll do that while he trains him as well. As Deku and Uraraka would pretty much train with Aizawa for the 2 weeks that they have off. As in that time, Deku would pretty much have learned the basics of... sorry about that. As in that time, Deku would have pretty much learned the basics of how to use the scarf, just like Aizawa does, and Uraraka would have learned more of the basics in how to use hand-to-hand combat more proficiently. As Deku and Uraraka would have definitely gotten a little bit of a boost to their powers, as, Deku would definitely be more of a foe to be reckoned with. On top of the fact that, he has all of these unorthodox moves with this quirk, he would also end up telling Uraraka that, maybe she should try considering using her quirk in different ways. Maybe using that weightlessness on herself and using some gadgets to try to propel herself into the air so she can fly around and be a better rescue hero than she already is. as Uraraka would take that into consideration, and also for the 2 weeks, she would also proceed to pretty much try to train that up, but she wouldn't still be able to quite get it, since it is something that is going to take her a long time, and since she didn't really ever use her quirk in that way, it's going to take her a little longer to pretty much get used to using her quirk in those weird and unorthodox ways that Deku did, considering that she didn't really have the drawbacks that Deku did, such as pretty much turning things into gold. As Uraraka would actually ask Deku what his drawback is during the 2 weeks that they have off, as Deku would say that he used to have a drawback, but now he doesn't anymore. As she would ask what his drawback is, as Deku would say, well, when I was a kid, I could turn things into gold, and I didn't really know how to reverse things. And because of that, I was pretty much forced to wear some gloves that pretty much made it so that I can pretty much touch things without turning them to gold, without fear of, kind of ruining things, I guess you could say. As, this one Uraraka would understand that, the only reason he doesn't have a drawback is because he trained hard. He put work into his quirk, and he put more work than anybody else could. As, Uraraka would pretty much look up to Deku a little bit more. As during that time, Deku and Uraraka would also take a couple of days to pretty much just chill together and do a little bit of hanging out. As, during that time, Deku and Uraraka would have decided that maybe they should take things to the next level. As they already hang out at the time, they might as well start dating. As Deku and Uraraka would pretty much establish a bit of a relationship during these 2 weeks. As this is when we're now actually going to be going back to school. As Deku and Uraraka are actually told about the UA Sports Festival. As Deku pretty much, decides that this is going to be awesome. He's finally going to be able to show off what he has. And this is going to be great for Uraraka's development. She's going to be able to fight people who are on her level. And Aizawa would actually look up to Deku as he would tell him to show off. As he would tell him to show people that, he's going to be the next symbol of peace himself. As Deku would smile towards Aizawa, thanking him for all that training he put him through. As Aizawa would tell him that, sure, but there's much more to be had. As Deku would look towards Aizawa and say, right. As he would then go up to the stands, as he's told that he actually has to give the speech. As Deku would proceed to give a very inspirational speech to others, telling them not to give up on their quirks, telling them that anybody can do whatever they want as long as they put their minds to it. Telling them that no matter what they think they can and can't do, that there will always be a way. And reminding everybody to give it their all, since no matter how they do, they can do better next time. Maybe this time they won't get so far, but if they try their hardest, at least they'll know that they did that, and they'll know that they gave 110% of their effort. As everybody would get hyped up, and they'd pretty much look towards Deku, as a lot of people would start cheering, thinking that kid's gonna definitely be great pro hero. With that attitude of his and that quirk, oh yeah, he's gonna be amazing. As Inko and Sashi would be pretty much watching in the stands as their kid is pretty much just growing up into a man that, they're extremely proud of. Deku is just, he's shining. He's always been a golden child, but they didn't expect him to have this much of a bright future ahead of himself. Back when he got those gloves, he was nothing like this. He was a little down about that stuff. And now, if he could see himself now, it's just amazing for them to see their boy grow up like this. As this is when Deku would finish up with the speech, as Midnight would announce to them all that they're actually going to be having a little bit of a race. As soon as the race starts, Todoroki would actually flash freeze the ground, as Deku would have actually had a little bit of the same idea, as a lot of people who were in Class 1A and some of the people who studied Deku's quirk would actually decide to jump as soon as Todoroki and Deku would decide to do everything. Todoroki would freeze the ground as he would hold a couple of the people down, as Deku would turn a couple of them into solid gold. As he would say, sorry about that, but I gotta get a bit of a lead, as, all of the kids would just be turned into gold, as Deku would pretty much have taken out all of the fodder people, all of the people who really weren't going to get that far in the sports festival, but, he had to do what he had to do. As this is when Deku would pretty much see the 0-pointer, as Deku would rush towards him and take a giant step, as he would say, Golden Domain! As besides him, Todoroki would use his ice to pretty much slide around the 0-pointers, as Bakugo would rush towards them and pretty much explode through them, just running past them. As Deku would see what Todoroki's doing and what Bakugo's doing and decide that maybe he's going to get in on that action as well. as this is when Deku would harden himself by turning himself into gold and rush straight through the 0-pointer, as he would break straight through the leg and just come out the other side. As this is when Deku would jump up into the air, as he would start using his gold in the way that Todoroki is using it, except he would turn it into more of a liquidy substance, allowing him to slide around even faster than Todoroki can. As Deku would pretty much get to the area with, the little holes, as Deku would jump from each one of them, pretty much flawlessly, making it look like the easiest thing in the world. As this is when they would get to the landmines, as Deku would decide to pretty much use the same strategy that he used in canon, except this time, he would use it a lot more proficiently. This time he would grab one explosive, as he would jump on the ground, and as soon as the explosive would let off, Deku would create a little bit of a golden sleigh under him, as he would say, "Woohoo!" As this is when Deku would pretty much slide to the finish line and get first place. As everybody would see what Deku had just done, as they would think that this kid is insane. But that was definitely one hell of a way to win that thing, as Deku would be awarded with the 10 million points, and in terms of his team, the team would go as follows: Bakugo, Deku, Uraraka, and Mei Hatsume. She would pretty much be added not because of any particular reason other than I want Uraraka and Mei to pretty much get to know each other sooner than they do in canon, because there's something that Mei's going to have to make for Uraraka. The gadgets for her to glide into the air, kind of like the outfit that Nejire has, except on a higher scale, since she can actually fly herself. As, this is when, they would proceed to pretty much get into position, as Deku's at the top of everything, and as soon as the cavalry battle starts, I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all, Deku would turn the entire thing into gold, as everybody would keep their normal points, and anybody who had lower than the amount of points that they needed would pretty much just get eliminated, as everybody in the cloud would just be like, that kid just won without even trying, as Bakugo would just be a little irked by the fact that Deku did it like that, and he didn't even have to fight for it, but Deku would just say that it's better to save their energy for the last event, as Bakugo would say he would pretty much calm down after realizing that Deku's right, as this is when the battles would be announced, as the first battle, of course, would be Deku versus Shinso. As soon as the battle starts, I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all, to be honest, Deku would turn Shinso into gold, as soon as Shinso speaks up, he would say something about how it must be nice to have such an amazing quirk and have all the girls falling over you. As Deku would just not be having it, as he would just turn Shinso into gold and win that battle immediately. As from that day forward, Shinso would have a little bit of a hatred towards Deku, seeing that he has everything handed to him. His quirk can make him rich. He has anything he wants, and his quirk has no drawbacks. He would just look at Deku as he was just handed everything that he has. And it's really not like that. Deku had to work for everything that he had. Of course, his quirk made everything easy, but a normal person probably wouldn't have gotten as far as Deku did. They'd probably only be in it for themselves and be able to turn everything else into gold. Probably would have not even gotten over the fact that they would be able to turn everything into gold, and they might have actually died in the same way that King Midas did in the original story. Since if you guys don't remember, the king would have actually asked to turn everything into gold, meaning that all the food, it would have turned into gold as well. It takes up an extreme amount of precision to use that quirk in the way that it's meant to be used, as there's a lot of talent that comes into how Deku uses it. As this is when the next battle is going to be announced, as Deku's pretty much wishing Uraraka good luck, as her battle is actually going to be against Bakugo. As in this version of events, Uraraka would actually do way better than she did in canon, this time actually ending up touching Bakugo after doing the debris stuff, except Bakugo can actually fly through the air with his explosion, so he would end up knocking her out of the arena and ended up winning. And Uraraka would get a lot less hurt than she did in canon, and Deku would just say that was a pretty good battle, and that she'll take down Bakugo for her, as she would smile and tell Deku good luck in his battle against Todoroki. As this is when Deku would look towards Todoroki, as Todoroki would just, give him a glare, as he would say, "You think you're better than me, huh? You half branded knockoff or something." I don't know. He would say something like that. I meant to say something, but the word just, they got messed up in my head a little bit. As Deku would look towards Todoroki, as he could see that Todoroki thinks that he's better than him. He thinks that just because his father's the number 2 hero endeavor, he can walk all over people. As that's what Deku would be thinking, but it's not really like that. As Deku would tell him that, "How about this? Let's see who's stronger without using our quirks." as Todoroki would say that he's not stupid. He saw the way that he handled the villains with Aizawa. If he tried that, he would lose instantly. As Deku would just smile as Todoroki would say, "Nah, I'm gonna embarrass you." As he would say, in front of all of these people, I'm gonna show that I am the strongest. That I can become the strongest here with only using half of my power. As Deku would say, only half of your power. That sounds interesting. I'll give it a go as well. As for the first portion, Todoroki would shoot a giant ice geyser at Deku as Deku would harden himself instantly, as he would proceed to break through the ice in the same fashion that Bakugo did, as he would rush straight towards Todoroki. As Todoroki would see as Deku's right in front of him, as Deku would throw a strong kick towards Todoroki's ribs, sending him flying, as Todoroki would have to catch himself with the ice, as a couple of them would actually be broken, as Deku would then rush towards Todoroki, as he would punch him straight in the face, sending Todoroki flying, as he would get up close to Todoroki, forcing Todoroki to activate his flame quirk, as he would shoot a little bit of fire straight towards Deku, as Deku would, pretty much walk straight through it, feeling no effects towards it, as all of his clothes would melt, and everybody would see what Deku looks like, as Deku would say, can't exactly have that happen, can't we? As Deku would pretty much remain as gold, and would pretty much create golden clothes for himself, as he would pretty much throw them boys on, and he would rush towards Todoroki, as he would proceed to turn Todoroki into gold, and as Todoroki's unable to move, as he would then decide that, maybe he's going to toy with him a little longer, as he would unturn Todoroki out from the gold, as he would then continue to beat on Todoroki, as everybody would just see how Deku's handling this kid, as they'd be in the stands just like cheering Deku on, thinking, yeah, get him, have a clean fight, no quirks, let's see who's the stronger. As Todoroki would get angry and use his flash freeze, where he uses fire and ice in a giant attack, as Deku, before he can use that, he decides that he has to take him down before he can harm anybody in the stands, as Deku would say, Golden Domain, as he would turn Todoroki into complete gold, as well as the attack, as Todoroki would be taken care of. And now we're going to go over what happens after. Cementos would have tried to get into it, but Deku would have been able to take care of it himself. As after the battle, Uraraka would pretty much go up to Deku and give him a little bit of a smooch on the cheek, as Deku would just pretty much go into his room, as he'd be talking to Uraraka about things, as Bakugo would barge in there saying, "Hey, Deku," as he would look towards him and say, "Hey, what's up, Kachan?" As Deku would say, "You better give it your all in this battle that's coming up, because I will. And if you don't, who knows what I can do to you." As Deku would say, "I wouldn't wish it any other way." As Bakugo would say, "I'm serious, I've been training, so you better be ready to bring that A game of yours." As Deku would smile and say, "Bring it on, Kachan, let's see who's stronger." As this is when Bakugo would proceed to look towards Deku, as he would smirk and say, "See you then." As 5 minutes would go by, and this is when Deku would actually have to go to the stands, as Deku would see that Bakugo's in the arena, as Deku would jump out from there, as he would land on the grass, and he would look towards Bakugo, as he would then crack his knuckles and his neck, as he would say, "Let's get this over with," as he would say, "I got that first place coming up," as Bakugo would grunt and say, "You think you're gonna win, don't you?" As Deku would say, "Of course I do. Why else would I be here?" As this is when Bakugo would smile, thinking that he doesn't know what he's in for. As the battle would start, as Bakugo would jump up into the air, shooting massive amounts of explosions. As Bakugo would remain into the air, as Deku would see that Bakugo played it smart, he decided to stay off of the ground to make it so that Deku can't turn him into gold. As Deku would decide that, let's make this a battle of endurance. As this battle, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this battle was pretty much the most boring one out of all of them. As Bakugo would proceed to pretty much just explode into the air, staying away from Deku, shooting huge explosions at him and AP shots, as Deku would stay on the ground using his golden form, as he would just hold his arms in front of him, dodging every attack and just pretty much keeping out of Bakugo's line of sight. As 5 minutes would go by of this, as the arena would pretty much just be covered in a thick fog of smoke, as Deku would use his golden ice slide that Todoroki does, kind of ish, as he would glide up towards Bakugo, as he would then hit him one good time on the jaw, sending Bakugo flying, crashing down to the ground. As soon as he does that, Deku would lunge towards the ground, as he would say, "Golden Domain!" As Bakugo would get, turned into gold as he can't move anymore, and Deku would be the winner of the sports festival. After this, All Might would award them all with their medals, as Deku would be in first, with Bakugo second and Todoroki third. With that, pretty much concluding the sports festival, and Deku ending up winning. This is when we're now actually going to cut over to afterwards, as Uraraka would rush towards Deku after the victory, as she would tell him that he did great, as everybody in the pretty much the stage would pretty much see that Deku just got hugged by some girl, as they'd be like, ooh, as Deku and Uraraka would rush towards the back, as Uraraka and Deku would pretty much go out to eat to celebrate, his victory at the sports festival. As the very next day, they would all pretty much arrive to class, as they'd all be told about the internships and their hero names that they're going to be picking. As Midnight would walk into the room, and everybody would pick their normal names as in canon, with Uraraka picking Oravity, and Deku actually picking Midas, the golden hero Midas. The king of gold. As, Midnight would actually think that that's an awesome name for his quirk, for his hero name. I mean, since his quirk is pretty similar to the king from the, the old myth, as Deku would pretty much end up picking that. And in terms of who he goes to for the internship, you guys are going to have to stick around and find out for the next part. But with that being said, guys, it has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.